Mogadishu, Somalia, October 1993. The city screamed. Not with sound, though sound was everywhere. The distinctive thump of rotor blades from Black Hawk helicopters circling overhead. The crack of small arms fire echoing off concrete buildings. The sharp reports of AK-47s mixing with the heavier bark of American M16s. The whistle of RPGs cutting through the hot afternoon air. No, the city screamed with chaos, with the weight of a mission that had gone catastrophically wrong, with the desperate urgency of American soldiers fighting to extract their wounded and dead from streets that had become a killing ground. Staff Sergeant Thomas Morgan pressed himself flat against the rooftop ledge of a three-story building overlooking the extraction route. Below him, in streets choked with dust and debris and burning tires, Task Force Ranger was fighting its way back to the safe zone. 2 Black Hawks were down. Rangers and Delta operators were taking casualties. The convoy that was supposed to extract them had gotten lost in the maze of identical streets. And the Somali militia kept coming. Thomas was 30 years old. He had kind eyes that his infant daughter would inherit. He had steady hands that had taken 47 confirmed kills in 8 months of deployments to hot zones around the world. He had a wife back home in North Carolina and a baby girl named Sarah who had been born just 2 months ago. He had held her exactly once in the hospital before deploying to the Horn of Africa. His M24 rifle felt like an extension of his body now. The Army's sniper weapon system, adapted from the Remington 700. 8 pounds of precision engineering that could reach out across 600 yards and change the course of a firefight with a single well-placed round. He had carried it through desert training at Fort Benning, had qualified expert with it at distances that made other soldiers shake their heads in disbelief. Now he used it to scan the streets below. The spotter beside him, Specialist Jimmy Reeves, was 22 and scared. They were all scared. That was the secret nobody told you about war. The brave men and the cowards felt exactly the same fear. The only difference was what they did with it. "Ghost," Reeves whispered, using the nickname that had stuck after Thomas's ability to appear and disappear from firing positions. "I got movement. East Street, technical incoming." Thomas shifted his scope, found the spot, saw the Toyota pickup truck mounted with a machine gun racing toward the American position. Somali fighters in the back, RPG launchers visible, moving fast through streets they knew like their own homes. "Confirmed," Thomas said quietly. "Militia, heavy weapons. They're trying to cut off the extraction route." He keyed his radio. "Overwatch to ground control. Enemy technical approaching from east. Multiple fighters, heavy weapons. Recommend immediate suppression." The radio crackled. "Ground control copies. Engage at your discretion. Convoy is 2 minutes out." 2 minutes was a lifetime when the enemy was this close and this determined. Thomas settled his breathing, found the rhythm that made the impossible shots possible. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 2, exhale for 6. In that moment of stillness between heartbeats, the rifle became an instrument of absolute precision. The technical rounded a corner, 400 yards out. The gunner in back was already swinging his weapon toward where American voices could be heard, where wounded Rangers were being dragged toward safety, where the convoy would have to pass. The M24 spoke once, a sharp crack that echoed off concrete walls. The gunner pitched backwards. The technical swerved as the driver panicked. The city erupted. Muzzle flashes sparked from the windows and doorways like angry fireflies. Green and red tracers cut through the dust-filled air. The distinctive sound of AK-47s merged into a continuous roar. The extraction point became a storm of incoming fire. Rangers scattered. Some took cover behind the downed Black Hawks. Others returned fire while dragging wounded toward the convoy that was finally arriving. The 50 caliber guns on the Humvees opened up, raking buildings with long bursts that chewed through concrete and flesh with equal efficiency. Thomas went to work. He was no longer a man with a wife and infant daughter. He was no longer someone who enjoyed fishing and football and the sound of rain on a southern porch. He became something else, something ancient and pure and terrible. He became the thing that stands between chaos and order, between life and death, between the men trying to get home and the enemy trying to kill them. "Target, breathe, fire," the dance repeated with mechanical precision. A militia fighter with an RPG on a second-story balcony. Down. A machine gunner setting up to sweep the extraction point. Down. A technical driver trying to ram through the American perimeter. Down. Reeves called corrections. "Wind speed, range adjustments, target priority. They worked together with the synchronization of intensive training. 2 men against a city, 2 men buying seconds with bullets. Seconds that men could use to climb into vehicles and drive away from this urban nightmare. The last Humvee loaded the final casualties. The driver revved the engine. The convoy began moving slowly, fighting through debris and bodies and burning obstacles. Rangers provided covering fire from the vehicles. Thomas kept shooting. Overwatch, the radio called. All vehicles loaded. Exfil in progress. Get to the rally point. I say again, exfil to rally point. Thomas looked at Reeves, at the young specialist's face streaked with dust and sweat and something like awe, at the kid who had 5 months left on his enlistment and parents who sent care packages every week. Get downstairs, Thomas said. There's a route 2 buildings east. Follow it to the secondary rally point. They'll have vehicles waiting. What about you? Someone has to slow them down. Buy time for the convoy to get clear of the ambush zone. Thomas's voice was calm, matter of fact, like he was discussing a training exercise. You move fast, you'll make it. Ghost, I can't just leave you here. Yes, you can, and you will. Thomas ejected the magazine from his rifle, slapped in a fresh one, 20 rounds. He had maybe 40 more in the pouches on his vest. That's an order, specialist. Reeves hesitated, then nodded. His eyes were wet. Hoo-ah, Ghost. Hoo-ah, kid, now move. Reeves disappeared down the stairwell. Thomas turned back to his scope. The militia were advancing now, moving with the confidence of fighters who sensed victory. They probably thought the Americans were leaving. They had no idea one man remained, one man with a rifle and a radio and a promise to keep. Thomas keyed the radio one last time. The frequency that went directly to the command center, the one that bypassed the normal chain, the one that went straight to the colonel who would write the letters to families. This is Overwatch, he said. Convoy is clear. Mission accomplished. All personnel extracted. A pause. Then the colonel's voice, tight with understanding, acknowledged Overwatch. What's your status? Thomas looked at the advancing militia, at the RPG teams that were finding his position now, at the rounds that kicked up concrete dust 10 feet to his left. 5 feet, getting closer with every burst. Acceptable, he said. He thought about Sarah, about how she would grow up without knowing him, about how he hoped she would be strong, about how he hoped someone would tell her that her daddy had been brave. Tell my family I love them. Tell Sarah her daddy was thinking about her. Tell her to be brave. The colonel's voice broke. We'll tell her, Ghost. Godspeed. Thomas set down the radio, picked up his rifle, settled into a firing position that felt as natural as breathing. He had maybe 2 minutes before they overran his position. 2 minutes to make every shot count. 2 minutes to give that convoy enough distance that the militia couldn't pursue and finish him off. 2 minutes to be the man he had always tried to be. The rifle cracked. Again, each shot deliberate, purposeful, perfect. In the end, it wasn't the bullets that killed him. It was the RPG that struck the building's edge 6 feet to his right. The explosion that brought down part of the rooftop in a cascade of concrete and rebar and dust. The collapse that buried him under rubble even as his rifle fell silent. But by then the convoy was 8 blocks away. By then 70 Rangers and Delta operators were on their way to the safe zone. By then Thomas Morgan had done what warriors do. He had bought time with his life. He had stood between his brothers and the darkness. He had held the line. The city settled into an uneasy quiet, and somewhere in North Carolina, a 2-month-old girl slept in her crib, unaware that she had just become the daughter of a hero. Present day, Arlington National Cemetery. The cemetery looked like a field of stone teeth, row after perfect row of white markers stretching across manicured grass under a blue sky that seemed impossibly clean compared to the world Sarah Morgan usually inhabited. Each stone represented a story, a life, a family changed forever. She stood in front of one particular stone. The marble was weathered now, 32 years of rain and sun and seasons passing, but the name was still clear. Staff Sergeant Thomas J. Morgan, United States Army Rangers, Somalia Silver Star, February 15, 1963 to October 3, 1993. Below the dates, a simple inscription: Greater love hath no man than this, that a man laid down his life for his friends. Sarah was 32 years old. She had her father's eyes. She had his steady hands. She had spent her entire adult life trying to understand a man she never knew. A man who existed only in stories told by her mother, by rangers who served with him, by a legend that felt more like mythology than memory. She wore her army uniform, the tan beret of military intelligence, the captain's bars that had taken 8 years to earn, the ribbons that told their own story. Afghanistan, Iraq, places where she had tried to be worthy of the name Morgan, places where she had succeeded and failed in equal measure. The wind moved through the trees. Spring in Virginia, the cherry blossoms were blooming near the memorials. Tourists were taking photos. Life continuing its relentless forward march, while Sarah stood in a field of the dead and tried to feel connected to a ghost. "I got orders," she said quietly. Her voice was steady, professional, the voice she used in briefings, the voice that hid everything underneath. Horn of Africa, intelligence support for special operations. Same kind of work you did, I guess, just with better technology. A robin landed on a nearby headstone, cocked its head, flew away. Mom died 6 months ago. Sarah's jaw tightened. Cancer. She fought hard, but it won anyway. Her last words were about you. She said you would have been proud of me. She paused. "I don't know if what I do matters, Dad. I sit in air-conditioned rooms and look at computer screens. I build target folders for operators who do the real work. I analyze patterns and write reports and brief officers who probably don't remember my name 10 minutes after I leave the room." The wind picked up, carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and earth. "I learned to shoot." Sarah's voice dropped lower. "I'm good, really good. Better than I probably should be for someone whose job is sitting behind a desk. But every time I'm on the range, I wonder if you would think I'm doing it right. If you would see something in my form that needs correction. If you would be proud or disappointed or just something." She knelt, placed her hand on the cold marble. The stone was smooth under her palm, permanent, unchanging, like the past itself. "I wish I knew you. Not the legend, not the ranger who held a rooftop alone against impossible odds. Just you, the guy who liked fishing, who wrote letters to Mom about wanting to come home, who held me once in a hospital before deploying." She closed her eyes. "I wish I had one memory. Just one. Something that was mine and not someone else's story." Footsteps crunched on gravel behind her. Sarah stood, turned. Her hand moved instinctively toward her sidearm before recognition stopped the motion. The man approaching was middle-aged, maybe 54, but he carried himself like someone older, like someone whose youth had been spent in places that aged you in ways that had nothing to do with calendars. He walked with a slight limp. His face showed the weathering of hard years. His eyes were blue and sharp and kind. He wore a worn baseball cap with 75th Ranger Regiment insignia, a field jacket despite the spring warmth. On his chest, a small patch, the Ranger tab and scroll. "You're Sarah," he said. It wasn't a question. "Do I know you?" "No, but I knew you're fussier." The man stopped a respectful distance away, looked at the headstone. "I was the spotter, the one with him on that rooftop when he made his last stand." Sarah's breath caught. "You're Reeves." "I am." The man's voice was rough, gravelly, like he had spent 30 years trying to cough up words that wouldn't come. "I come here every year. October 3rd, spend an hour, tell him what's happening in my life, apologize for still being alive when he's not." He looked at Sarah. "I've seen you here before, watched from a distance, figured you needed privacy. Why approach now?" Reeves reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded envelope, yellow with age. "Because you're deploying, and before you go, you need to know who your father really was. Not the legend, the man." Sarah took the envelope. Her hands were steady, but her heart was hammering. "What is this?" "Letters. Thomas wrote them every week. To your mother. To you even though you were just a baby. He'd write them between missions, carry them until he could mail them from base." The man's eyes were distant, seeing things 30 years gone. "The last letters never got mailed. I found them in his gear after. Been carrying them ever since, waiting for the right time." "Why now?" "Because you're going to war. Maybe not the same war we fought, but war just the same. And I see in your eyes what I saw in his. You're trying to be him, trying to live up to something so big you can't see around it." Reeves stepped closer. His voice dropped. "You need to know he was scared too, that he doubted, that he was just a man trying to do his best. That's all any of us are." Sarah held the envelope like it might disintegrate. "Did he know?" At the end, Reeves's jaw worked. That I was going to make it out and he wasn't? Yeah, he knew. He gave me the order to leave. Told me about you. Told me to tell you to be brave. A tear tracked down the weathered face. I've spent 32 years trying to be worthy of that gift. Of the life he bought me. Sarah felt her own eyes burning. Did he say anything else? Reeves smiled, small and sad. He said you had his eyes even though you were only 2 months old. That you were going to be something special. That he couldn't wait to meet the woman you'd become. The man reached out, gripped Sarah's shoulder. He was right. You are something special. And he would be so damn proud. They stood together in silence. Two people connected by a ghost. By a man who had died before one of them could form memories and change the other's life forever. The sun moved behind clouds. The temperature dropped. The cemetery felt like a threshold between worlds. I'm supposed to report to Fort Bragg tomorrow, Sarah said finally. Fly out to the Horn in 72 hours. Then you need to read those tonight. Reeves released her shoulder, stepped back. And Sarah, one more thing. What? I work as a contractor now. Teach marksmanship to security forces. The man's eyes sharpened. I'll be at your duty station, F-Phobe Sentinel. Been there 8 months, so if you need anything, if you need someone who knew your father, who can tell you the stories, I'll be there. Sarah looked at him, at this weathered ranger who had carried her father's letters for 3 decades, who had survived when Thomas Morgan had not, who represented the last living connection to a man she never knew. Thank you, she said. It sounded inadequate, insufficient for the weight of the moment. Reeves nodded, gave a small salute. Not the crisp military gesture, but the informal acknowledgement of one warrior to another. Then he turned and walked away, his limp more pronounced, his shoulders bent under burdens Sarah could only imagine. She looked down at the envelope, her father's handwriting on the front, faded but legible. For Sarah, when she's ready. The wind picked up again, stronger now, like the world was trying to push her forward, away from this place of stone and memory, toward whatever waited in the Horn of Africa. Sarah tucked the envelope carefully into her uniform pocket, placed her hand on her father's headstone one more time. I'll try to make you proud, Dad. I'll try to be brave. Then she walked away, toward her car, toward the airport, toward a war zone on the other side of the world where she would discover that being Thomas Morgan's daughter meant more than sharing a name. It meant carrying a legacy forward into the fire. Behind her, the cemetery stood silent. The stones watched. The dead kept their counsel. And somewhere in the space between memory and hope, a ranger who had been dead for 32 years smiled. FOB Sentinel, Horn of Africa, 4 days later. The heat was a living thing. It rose from the tarmac in visible waves. It wrapped around Sarah like a wet blanket the moment she stepped off the C-130's ramp. It tasted like dust and jet fuel and something else, something primal. The taste of a place where civilization's veneer wore thin. Sarah carried a single deployment bag and a hard case that drew curious glances from the loadmasters. The bag held clothes and toiletries and the practical necessities of a 6-month deployment. The case held something else, something she wasn't supposed to have, something she had spent 2 years building in secret and months perfecting and 0 time regretting. Forward Operating Base Sentinel sat in the middle of nowhere important. A collection of concrete barriers and prefab buildings and guard towers rising from red dirt that stretched to horizons that shimmered with heat. The perimeter was patrolled by local contract security forces carrying AK-47s with the casual indifference of men who had carried weapons so long they became invisible. Guard towers held soldiers scanning sectors with eyes that had seen too much and expected more. Captain Morgan, a staff sergeant, approached with a clipboard and the expression of someone whose day had just gotten longer. I'm your escort to the TOC. Colonel's waiting. Sarah followed him through the maze of barriers and buildings, past motor pools where mechanics worked under the hoods of vehicles that looked held together by prayer and baling wire, past command tents where officers studied maps and argued about zones of control, past a small gym where shirtless soldiers lifted weights with the dedicated intensity of men trying to maintain some sense of normalcy in an abnormal place. The Tactical Operations Center sat at the heart of the base, concrete walls thick enough to stop rockets, reinforced roof, enough communications equipment to contact God if he had the right frequency. Inside, the temperature dropped 20 degrees, air conditioning hummed, Screens glowed with real-time feeds from drones circling somewhere above the horn. Maps covered walls. Radios chattered with constant traffic. It smelled like coffee and electronics and the particular scent of places where decisions got made. Colonel James Harris ran the intelligence shop. He was 48, clean-shaven, precise, the kind of officer who measured his words like ammunition. He looked up from a computer screen when Sarah entered. His handshake was firm but brief. "Captain Morgan, your reputation precedes you. Top of your class at the intelligence course. Multiple combat deployments, language qualified in Arabic, impressive credentials for 8 years of service." "Thank you, sir." Sarah kept her voice neutral. Professional, the voice that revealed nothing. "I understand you're here to support our targeting efforts against the local weapons trafficking networks." Harris gestured toward a workstation in the corner. "Satellite imagery, signal intercepts, pattern of life analysis, standard intelligence work. You'll coordinate with our tactical teams, but you won't be going outside the wire. We keep our intelligence assets inside where they're useful." "Understood, sir." Harris studied her for a moment. His eyes were gray and cool and calculating. "You're Thomas Morgan's daughter." It wasn't a question, but Sarah answered anyway. "Yes, sir. Your father was a hero." The colonel's expression softened slightly. "Gave his life so his brothers could go home. Mogadishu, that kind of sacrifice defines what we do, what we stand for." "Thank you, sir." "But this isn't Somalia." Harris's voice hardened again. "This is surgical, precise, intelligence-driven. We identify targets. We build folders. We pass them to operators who have the training for direct action. That's the system. That's how we win. Clear?" "Crystal clear, sir." "Good." Harris turned back to his screen, dismissed. Sarah found her way to the assigned workstation. A desk, a computer, 3 monitors showing various feeds, a small space in a climate-controlled room where she would spend the next 6 months analyzing patterns and building reports and trying to find meaning in the endless stream of data that modern warfare produced. She sat down, logged into the classified network, began reviewing the target folders already built by her predecessor. Abu Khatim, Rashid Alad, a dozen other names, faces captured by drones and satellites, lives reduced to movement patterns and communication intercepts and probability matrices. The work was familiar, comforting in its routine. This was what she had trained for, what she was good at, sitting in air-conditioned rooms while other people did the dangerous work, being the analyst, being the support, being safe. The hard case sat under her desk, heavy, silent, waiting. Sarah tried not to think about it, tried to focus on the work, on the patterns emerging from the data, on being what the Army said she was instead of what something inside her wanted to be. It lasted about 4 hours. "Captain Morgan." A voice pulled her from the screen. She looked up to find a man standing by her desk. He was maybe 38, tall, rangy, sun-weathered. He wore multicam fatigues and the particular air of confidence that came from doing dangerous things so often they became routine. His name tape read Brennan. The unit patch on his shoulder was Delta Force. "Captain Brennan." Sarah stood, shook his offered hand. "Just Brennan." He smiled slightly. "We're not big on formality. I run the primary assault element. Heard we have a new intelligence officer. Just got in country 4 hours ago." Fast turn around. Brennan leaned against the desk. His eyes were sharp. Assessing, not hostile, but not entirely trusting either. "We're targeting a weapons smuggler named Abu Khatim. Been working him for 3 months. Could use fresh eyes on his pattern of life. I've been reviewing the folder." Sarah gestured toward her screen. "He's getting nervous. Changes in his communications pattern. Vehicle movements increasing. He knows someone's hunting him." "Smart read." Brennan's expression shifted, respect beginning to show through the professional distance. "Most analysts take a week to spot those indicators. You caught it in 4 hours. Pattern recognition is what I do. Then you'll fit in fine." He straightened, pushed off the desk. "We brief at 1800 daily. Be there. Bring your assessments." "And Morgan?" "Sir." Brennan's eyes held hers. "Your father's reputation is well known in the teams. Mogadishu, he saved a lot of lives. That counts for something. But here you make your own reputation. You earn respect by being good at your job, not by having a famous name. Fair." "Fair." He nodded, walked away. Sarah watched him go, felt the weight of expectations settle a little heavier on her shoulders. The evening brief was held in a smaller room adjacent to the TOC. Maps on the walls, satellite photos, a screen showing drone feeds, a dozen men in various states of uniform and facial hair. Operators, the men who went outside the wire, who kicked down doors and brought back high-value targets and lived in a world Sarah only touched through computer screens. Brennan ran the meeting with efficient precision. Target updates, movement patterns, raid planning. The conversation was technical and casual in equal measure. These were professionals discussing their craft, like surgeons planning an operation or pilots planning a flight, just with more weapons and higher stakes. Sarah sat in the back, listened, made notes. When Brennan called on her for assessment, she delivered it clearly, concisely. Abu Qatim was preparing to relocate, probably within the next week. If they wanted him, they needed to move soon. The operators listened, asked questions, nodded at her answers. She could feel them measuring her, weighing her competence against their needs, deciding if she was an asset or a liability. When the brief ended, a sergeant approached. He was maybe 28, built like a linebacker. His name tape read Reeves. "Good brief, ma'am. Most intel types drown us in PowerPoint. You kept it simple. I try to give operators what they need, not what I think sounds impressive." Reeves grinned. "You'll do fine." He extended his hand. Mike Reeves, breacher and general-purpose troublemaker. Sarah shook it. "Any relation to Jimmy Reeves?" "My father." Reeves's expression shifted. Surprise and something else. "You knew him?" "Met him 4 days ago. At Arlington. He told me about my father." Small world. Mike Reeves's grip tightened slightly. "Dad talks about Ghost all the time. Says he's the reason I exist." Sarah's throat constricted. "He's here. On the base. Teaching marksmanship to the contract forces." "I know. He told me he would be. Then you should find him." Reeves released her hand. "Dad doesn't open up to many people. But Thomas Morgan's daughter? He'll talk to you. Probably needs to, truth be told." Sarah found Jimmy Reeves 2 hours later. The small arms range sat on the eastern edge of the base. A series of berms and target stands and a small wooden shelter that provided minimal shade. In the fading light, Reeves was working with 3 local security guards, teaching them proper sight picture, breathing techniques, the fundamentals that made the difference between hitting and missing. He looked up when Sarah approached, smiled like he had been expecting her. "Sarah." He dismissed the guards with a gesture. They wandered off, chattering in their own language. "How's your first day?" "Overwhelming. Educational." Sarah hesitated. "Met your son. Mike's a good man. Better operator than I ever was." Reeves picked up a rifle from the wooden bench. An M14. Old but maintained. He checked the chamber with practiced ease. "You read the letters?" "Yes." Sarah's voice was quiet. "Last night. All of them." "And?" She looked at the man who had carried her father's words for 3 decades. At the living connection to a ghost, she was still trying to understand. He was scared. Human. Nothing like the legend. Sarah paused. "Thank you for keeping them, for giving them to me." "Your father wrote those letters to remind himself why he was fighting." Reeves set down the rifle, looked out at the range, the target standing silent in the gathering dusk. "A warrior needs something to hold on to, something that makes the fear manageable. For Thomas, it was you and your mother. What do you hold on to?" Reeves was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, "The promise I made, to be worthy of the gift he gave me, to live well, to teach others what he taught me." He turned to Sarah. "What about you? What do you hold on to?" Sarah thought about the question, about the hard case under her desk in the TOC, about the weapons she had built in secret and carried halfway around the world for reasons she couldn't quite articulate, about the gap between what she was supposed to be and what something inside her needed to be. "I don't know yet." The admission felt dangerous, honest in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. "I'm still figuring that out." "Then let me help." Reeves picked up the M14 again, handed it to her. "Let's see if Thomas passed down more than just his eyes." They shot until the light failed. Reeves coaching, correcting, teaching with the patient intensity of someone who had done this many times before. Sarah felt the rifle become an extension of her intention, felt the gap between thought and impact collapse into something approaching instinct. "Your father could read wind like poetry." Reeves watched her fire, adjust, fire again. He understood that shooting wasn't about the rifle. It was about the space between the rifle and the target, all the invisible forces that push and pull, gravity, air pressure, temperature. "You understand that too." I've had good teachers, but not enough practice. Reeves took the rifle when she finished the magazine. You're technically proficient. Your fundamentals are solid. But there's a difference between range shooting and field shooting, between paper targets and real stakes. I'm an intelligence officer, not a sniper. You're Thomas Morgan's daughter. Reeves's voice was gentle but firm. That means something whether you like it or not. The teams here will find out. They'll have expectations, questions, and eventually situations where having someone who can shoot matters more than having someone who can build a PowerPoint. The colonel was clear. I stay inside the wire. Colonels give orders. Reality gives different orders. Reeves handed her a magazine. Fresh rounds, one more drill. This time, I want you to imagine those targets are trying to kill someone you care about. Someone who can't fight back. Someone counting on you. Sarah loaded the magazine, brought the rifle up, looked down the sights at targets 200 meters distant. Paper silhouettes that represented nothing real. Except in her mind, they became real. They became militia advancing on rangers trying to extract. They became the threat her father had faced in his last moments. They became the space where duty and fear and love collided into choices that echoed across decades. She fired. Not the slow, careful pace of target shooting, but the faster rhythm of combat. Controlled pairs, double taps, moving between targets with fluid precision. When the magazine was empty, every target bore holes in the center mass. Reeves was quiet, then he said, he would be so damn proud. Sarah lowered the rifle. Her hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline or emotion or both. Over the next 2 weeks, a routine emerged. Sarah worked in the TOC during the day, building target folders, analyzing patterns, coordinating with Brennan's team on raid planning. At night, she shot with Reeves, learning the craft her father had mastered, closing the gap between theory and practice. The teams began to accept her. Brennan would stop by her workstation, ask questions, listen to her assessments with the attention of someone who understood that good intelligence saved lives. Mike Reeves introduced her to the other operators. They joked, told stories, treated her like she belonged. And slowly, carefully, Sarah began to feel like she did belong, like she was contributing, like her work mattered in tangible ways. But the hard case remained under her desk, unopened, waiting. 3 weeks into her deployment, the situation changed. Sarah was reviewing satellite imagery when she caught it. A pattern anomaly. Abu Katim's vehicles were staging at multiple locations. His communications had gone dark for 16 hours, then resumed with different encryption. His security detail had doubled. She pulled up historical data, compared patterns. The changes matched every indicator of someone preparing to relocate, to disappear before the hunters could close in. Sarah walked to Colonel Harris's office. He was on a conference call. She waited. When he finished, she laid out the analysis. Sir, Abu Katim is running. We have maybe 48 hours before he relocates, and we lose him for months. Harris studied the data. His expression was unreadable. You're certain? Pattern changes across all networks, movement indicators, communication shifts. Sir, these are textbook pre-operational indicators of a major position change. Harris was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. I'll pass it up the chain. If they approve, Brennan's team will move tomorrow night. Sir, with respect, tomorrow night might be too late. Then I suggest you pray for fast approval, Captain. Harris's tone was final. Dismissed. Sarah left his office with frustration building in her chest. She had seen this before. The gap between intelligence and action. The bureaucracy that turned urgent into eventual. The system that prioritized procedures over results. She found Brennan in the gym, alone, doing pull-ups with the methodical intensity of someone who pushed his body because his mind needed the outlet. We need to move on Katim tonight, she said without preamble. Brennan dropped from the bar, grabbed a towel. Based on your analysis? Based on reality. He's running. Every indicator says he's relocating. If we wait for approval through channels, he'll be gone. Harris won't authorize. Then go without authorization. Brennan studied her, his eyes sharp. That's not how this works, Morgan. We have a chain of command, rules, procedures. And while we follow procedures, a weapons trafficker who's armed militants across 3 countries disappears. Sarah's voice was hard. How many Americans die because we waited for paperwork? You sound like your father. Is that a criticism? Brennan dried his face with the towel. No, it's an observation. Thomas Morgan was famous for doing what needed doing regardless of what his chain of command said. He saved lives. He also died for it. Would you rather he had followed orders and let those Rangers die? The question hung in the air between them. A challenge, a test, the kind of moment that defined relationships and revealed character. Brennan threw the towel aside. We launch at 0200. Wheels up at 0230. Tell no one. If this goes wrong, you never had this conversation. Understood. And Morgan? Brennan's voice dropped. If Khatam really is relocating, if you're right about the timing, we're going to hit prepared defenses. This could get ugly fast. Then I suggest you brief your team well. Sarah walked back to the TOC. The sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that had no business being so beautiful in a place so harsh. She sat at her workstation, pulled the hard case from under the desk, set it on the surface. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the latches. Inside was a rifle, custom-built, a bolt-action precision system chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum. The stock was adjustable. The barrel was free-floated. The scope was German-made. The suppressor was titanium. Every component had been selected by gunsmiths who worked for organizations that didn't officially exist. Organizations Sarah had worked with in previous assignments that her personnel file didn't acknowledge. She assembled the weapon with movements so practiced they felt automatic. Stock to receiver, bolt carrier group, scope mounting. Her hands knew the routine, had done it dozens of times in preparation for a moment she wasn't sure would ever come. The rifle felt right, balanced, an extension of will made physical. Sarah checked the time, 6 hours until launch. She had work to do. She needed to review the target area, identify overwatch positions, calculate ranges and wind patterns, and all the invisible mathematics that turned intention into impact. But first, she needed to write a letter. She pulled out a piece of paper, the old-fashioned kind, something that would exist independent of computers and classified networks in the digital ephemera that constituted modern life. She wrote to her father, told him what she was about to do, told him she was scared, told him she hoped she was making the right choice, told him she was trying to be brave like he had told that long-ago baby girl to be. When she finished, she folded the letter, placed it in her pocket, right next to where her father's final letter to her rested. The words he had written 32 years ago that had finally reached her across the gulf of time and death. Then Sarah Morgan picked up her rifle and walked toward the edge of the base where night was falling and war was waiting, and choices were about to be made that would define everything that came after. The guard tower on the northern perimeter was the tallest structure on the base. 3 stories of welded metal and sandbags and a wooden platform at the tops that gave an unobstructed view of everything within 5 kilometers. Sarah climbed the ladder with her rifle slung across her back. Her breathing was steady. Her hands were sure. The young private on duty looked surprised to see a captain climbing into his domain. "Ma'am, we weren't notified of any inspection." "Communications check," Sarah said smoothly. "They need verification of tower visibility for the new satellite system." It was a thin lie, but delivered with confidence, it passed without question. Sarah set up her position, extended the bipod, adjusted the scope, began the mathematical preparations that turned chaos into precision. Wind speed, direction, temperature, humidity, range to likely target areas. The calculations filled a small notebook with numbers that represented life and death in algebraic form. 2,000 meters to Abu Khatim's compound. A difficult shot in daylight, nearly impossible at night, but the team would have infrared lasers. Sarah had night vision compatible optics, and she had her father's training flowing through hands that shared his DNA. Below in the darkness, Brennan's team was loading into helicopters. 7 men moving with quiet efficiency, checking weapons, reviewing plans, preparing to fly into danger because an intelligence officer had read patterns correctly and an operator had trusted her enough to act. Sarah's radio crackled on the tactical frequency. "Havoc 6 to Overwatch. Do you copy?" It took her a moment to realize Brennan was talking to her, that he had given her a call sign, that she was part of the operation instead of just supporting it. She keyed her microphone. "Overwatch copies. I have eyes on target area. Copy. ETA 20 minutes. If this goes sideways, I'm blaming you." "Fair enough." Sarah surprised herself by smiling. "Try not to get shot." "No promises." The helicopters lifted off. Their rotors beat the air into submission. They flew low, nap of the earth, using terrain to mask their approach. Sarah watched them through her scope, tiny shapes moving against the stars. Behind her, the base continued its evening routine, unaware that 7 men were flying toward contact, unaware that a captain was sitting in a guard tower with a weapon she wasn't supposed to have, unaware that the next 20 minutes would change everything. Sarah settled into her shooting position, found the natural stillness between heartbeats, breathed the way Reeves had taught her, the way her father had breathed on rooftops 30 years gone. The helicopters dropped into the target area, fast ropes deployed, men descended into the compound like shadows given form. For 5 seconds, everything was perfect. Textbook insertion, the kind of operation that went exactly according to plan. Then the world exploded into fire. The first RPG streaked from a second-story window, missed the lead element by meters, detonated against the compound wall in a flash that lit the night vision optics like a miniature sun. Before the operators could recover, automatic weapons fire erupted from 3 positions simultaneously. "Contact! Contact!" Brennan's voice cut through the radio. "We're in a kill zone!" Through her scope, Sarah watched the ambush unfold with horrible clarity. The enemy had known, had prepared firing positions, had turned the compound into a carefully orchestrated trap. 2 operators went down in the first exchange, not dead but wounded, bleeding, their teammates dragging them toward cover that barely existed. Sarah's world narrowed to the view through her scope, to the calculations that happened faster than thought, to the choices measured in fractions of seconds. First target, an enemy fighter with an RPG, moving to reload, positioning to drop a rocket into the exposed Americans. Sarah's crosshairs settled on his chest. She compensated for wind, for distance, for the fact that she was about to take a human life to save human lives, and that was the bargain warriors made with darkness. The rifle spoke once. The suppressor reduced the sound to a crack that was lost in the distant chaos. 2 seconds later, the time it took for the bullet to cross 2 kilometers of African night, the fighter dropped. The RPG clattered unfired to the ground. On the radio, confusion. "Did you see that? Target just dropped." Brennan's voice cut through. "Whatever it was, keep moving." Sarah was already tracking to her next target, a machine gunner pinning down 2 operators. Fire discipline good, professional, deadly. She placed the crosshairs, accounted for the wind that had shifted slightly, sent another round downrange. The machine gun went silent. Now the enemy knew something was wrong. They couldn't identify the threat, but they knew someone was killing them. They began pulling back, repositioning, trying to make themselves harder targets. Sarah continued her work with clinical precision. Each target selected based on threat priority, each shot carefully calculated, each trigger press followed by observation to assess effects before moving to the next problem. An enemy officer trying to coordinate the defense, down. A sniper setting up in a window, down. A fighter preparing to throw a grenade, down. One by one, the enemy's advantages dissolved. What had been a potential massacre transformed into a winnable fight. Brennan's team pushed forward, breached the main building, cleared rooms with violent efficiency. Minutes later, Brennan's voice on the radio. "Objective secure. We have Katim requesting immediate exfil." Sarah watched through her scope as the QRF helicopters came in, as wounded men were loaded, as a hooded prisoner was dragged aboard, as the operation that should have ended in disaster concluded with success. She began disassembling her rifle. Hands steady, mind quiet, the violence done, the mission accomplished. But as she worked, something caught her eye through the scope, a figure on a distant building, watching the compound, talking on a satellite phone, too far to identify clearly, but something about the posture, the deliberate positioning. Sarah zoomed to maximum magnification, enhanced the image as much as her optics allowed. The figure turned slightly, just enough, just for a moment. And Sarah saw his face, Colonel Harris, watching the compound, on a satellite phone at 0300 hours, when he should have been asleep in his quarters or managing operations from the TOC. Watching the operation he hadn't authorized, that he had explicitly ordered delayed, watching with the expression of someone who had expected a different outcome. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Understanding crashed over her like a wave. Harris was the leak, had been all along, had warned Abu Katim, had set up the ambush, had tried to get Brennan's team killed. Her hands moved automatically, breaking down the rifle, securing components. Her mind was racing ahead, processing implications, assessing threats. She couldn't report this. Not yet. Not without proof beyond what she had seen. Harris was a colonel. She was a captain. Her word against his would end with her career in ruins and Harris walking free. She needed evidence, time, a plan. But first, she needed to get off this tower before Harris realized someone had been watching him watch the operation. Sarah climbed down the ladder. The young private was focused on his sector. He barely acknowledged her departure. She walked back toward the TOC, carrying her rifle case, her mind spinning through possibilities. Her father's letters in her pocket feeling heavier than they had any right to. Halfway across the base, Brennan intercepted her. His face was streaked with dust and cordite residue. His eyes were bright with adrenaline and something else. That was you, on Overwatch. It wasn't a question. Yes, you saved 7 lives tonight, Morgan. Maybe more. Brennan's voice was quiet, intense. Where the hell did you learn to shoot like that? My father taught me. Through the words he never got to say in person. Brennan studied her, then nodded once. Sharp. Decisive. You're operational now. Officially. Whatever your job description says, you're with my team. Clear? Clear. Good. He started to walk away, then stopped. Turned back. Harris is going to have questions about who provided support fire, about how we launched without authorization, about all of it. Let him ask. This could end badly, for both of us. Sarah thought about her father, about the choice he had made on a rooftop 32 years ago, about standing between chaos and order, about paying prices that seemed too high until you considered the alternative. Some things are worth the risk, she said. Brennan smiled. Tired, genuine. Yeah, they are. Get some sleep, Morgan. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. He walked away toward the team areas, toward hot showers and weapons cleaning and the post-mission rituals that let operators process what they had done and prepare to do it again. Sarah stood alone in the darkness. The base was quiet now. The helicopters were shut down. The crisis was past. Everything was returning to normal. Except nothing was normal anymore, because Sarah had crossed a line tonight, had become something other than an analyst, had proven she could do more than build target folders. And she had discovered that the greatest threat wasn't outside the wire, it was inside, wearing a uniform, giving orders. She looked toward the TOC, toward the building where Colonel Harris was probably right now, wondering how his ambush had failed, how his plan had fallen apart, how 7 men he had tried to kill had survived. Sarah Morgan had answers to those questions, had evidence that needed gathering, had choices that needed making about duty and loyalty, and where the line was drawn when the chain of command itself was compromised. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, she walked to her quarters, lay down on a bunk that was too narrow and too hard, pulled out her father's letter, the one he had written to a 2-month-old girl who would grow up without him. Be brave, he had written. Be strong. Be the kind of person who stands up when it matters. Sarah folded the letter carefully, placed it back in her pocket, closed her eyes. And somewhere in the darkness between waking and sleep, she made a promise. To her father, to Reeves, to the 7 men who were alive because she had picked up a rifle when the system had failed them. She would be brave. She would be strong. She would stand up. Even if it cost her everything. Especially then. A Phobe Sentinel dawn. Sarah woke to the sound of helicopters. The rhythmic thump of rotors slicing through air that was already hot at 0530. She lay on her bunk for a moment, staring at the plywood ceiling, processing the fact that she was still alive, that she hadn't been arrested in the night, that Colonel Harris hadn't kicked down her door with military police in tow. The operation had happened 8 hours ago. 8 hours since she had put rounds downrange from a guard tower without authorization. Since she had saved Brennan's team from an ambush that should have killed them. Since she had watched Colonel Harris standing on a distant building, satellite phone in hand, watching Americans fight for their lives. 8 hours was a long time in military bureaucracy. Long enough for reports to be filed, for questions to be asked, for investigations to begin. Sarah sat up. Her body ached with the particular soreness that came from holding a shooting position for extended periods. Her hands still smelled like gun oil, despite washing them twice. The rifle case sat in the corner of her quarters, packed and secured, and representing evidence of actions she couldn't explain without confessing to violations that would end her career. She dressed quickly, uniform crisp despite the heat, hair pulled back in a regulation bun, the mask of professional competence that hid the chaos underneath. Her father's letters were in her cargo pocket, right where they always were now, a talisman against uncertainty. The morning brief was at 0600. She had 30 minutes. Sarah walked through the base as it came to life. Soldiers emerging from quarters like ants from a disturbed hill. The smell of the dining facility cooking breakfast. Diesel engines coughing to life in the motor pool. The base had a rhythm, a pulse. Life continuing its forward march regardless of individual dramas. The TOC was already busy when she arrived. Officers studying screens, NCOs coordinating logistics, the machine of modern warfare processing the night's events into reports and assessments and orders for the day ahead. Colonel Harris stood at his usual position, coffee in hand, expression neutral. He looked up when Sarah entered. His gray eyes were unreadable. Captain Morgan? His voice was level, professional. My office. Now, Sarah's stomach tightened, but she kept her face blank. Sir. She followed him into the small office adjacent to the TOC. Harris closed the door, gestured to a chair, sat behind his desk with the deliberate movements of someone in complete control. For a long moment, he said nothing, just studied her with those cool gray eyes. Then, you launched an unauthorized operation last night. Sir, Captain Brennan. I'm not talking about Brennan. Harris's voice cut through her explanation like a blade. I'm talking about you. You convinced him to launch outside the chain of command. You provided intelligence assessments that bypassed proper channels. And unless I'm very much mistaken, you provided overwatch fire from our perimeter. Sarah kept her expression neutral. Sir, my analysis indicated Abu Katim was relocating. Time was critical. Your analysis, Harris leaned forward. You've been in country 3 weeks. You think you know better than the chain of command? Better than officers with years of experience in this theater? I think targets don't wait for paperwork, sir. The silence stretched. Harris's jaw worked. Finally, he said, Abu Katim is in custody. Initial interrogation that suggests he was indeed preparing to relocate. Your assessment was correct. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. Harris's voice went cold. 7 men could have died last night because you and Brennan decided to cowboy an operation. The fact that it worked doesn't make it acceptable. The fact that someone, and I will find out who, provided unauthorized fire support doesn't make it right. With respect, sir, 7 men are alive. Katim is in custody. A major weapons trafficker is off the board. That sounds like success to me. Success built on insubordination. Harris stood, walked to the window, looked out at the base. You're Thomas Morgan's daughter. I understand that comes with a certain perspective. But your father died because he made choices outside the chain of command, because he decided he knew better. Is that the legacy you want to follow? My father died saving his brothers. Sarah's voice was hard now, control slipping. He made a choice to stand between danger and the men who depended on him. I'd call that heroism, not insubordination. Harris turned. His expression was difficult to read. Maybe both. Maybe heroism and insubordination are closer than you think. He moved back to his desk. Sat. You're officially reprimanded. Written counseling in your permanent file. One more unauthorized action, and you're on the first transport back to the States. Clear? Crystal clear, sir. Dismissed. Sarah stood, saluted, turned toward the door. Captain, Harris's voice stopped her. That fire support last night, whoever provided it saved American lives. I won't forget that. But I also won't forget that someone on this base has capabilities they haven't disclosed. Skills that should have been reported through proper channels. Is there a question, sir? Just an observation. Harris's eyes were cold. We'll be watching more closely now. All of us. Sarah left the office. Her hands were steady, but her heart was pounding. Harris knew. Maybe not with certainty, maybe not with proof, but he knew she had been the shooter. And more importantly, he knew she was dangerous to whatever plan he had been executing. She found Brennan in the team room, a converted storage container that had been transformed into the operational heart of the assault element. Weapons racks lined the walls, maps covered surfaces. Gear hung from hooks with the organized chaos of professional warriors. The room smelled like gun oil and coffee and the particular scent of men who lived close to danger. We've been summoned, Brennan said without preamble. Hire wants a debrief on the Katim operation, which means we need to get our story straight. What story is that? The one where we launched with proper authorization that somehow got lost in the shuffle of radio traffic and shift changes. Brennan's voice was dry. The one where our intelligence was time-sensitive, and we followed established protocol for immediate action. Lying to the chain of command. Adjusting our recollection to match what makes sense. Brennan met her eyes. Harris wants your head on a pike. He's already filed paperwork questioning your judgment. If we don't present a united front, this whole thing falls apart. And the fire support? What fire support? Brennan's expression was flat. We had excellent tactical positioning. The enemy made mistakes. We exploited them. That's what we do. Sarah studied him. This operator who had trusted her assessment enough to risk his career, who was now willing to lie to protect hers. Why are you doing this? Because your intel was solid. Because 7 of my men are breathing because of you. And because I've seen enough of Harris's operations to know something's wrong. Brennan lowered his voice. 3 missions in the last 6 months, all compromised. All target areas that turned into ambushes. Last night was just the most obvious. You think Harris is dirty? I think someone is feeding intelligence to the enemy. I think Kadam knew we were coming. And I think you getting Harris's attention right now is dangerous for reasons that have nothing to do with unauthorized operations. The door opened. Mike Reeves entered with another operator. Both men carried coffee and the alert exhaustion of soldiers running on adrenaline and caffeine. Meeting in 10 minutes, Mike said. Hires in a mood. Apparently someone forgot to file the proper forms before we went and captured a high-value target. Tragic oversight, the other operator said. We should definitely be more careful about paperwork next time someone's trying to kill us. The gallows humor hung in the air. These were men who processed trauma through sarcasm and kept moving forward because stopping meant thinking too hard about what they did and why. Sarah felt something shift inside her, a sense of belonging to something larger than herself, to a tribe that valued competence over protocol, that measured worth in results rather than regulations. The debrief was held in a secure conference room. Present were Colonel Harris, a major from the higher headquarters that controlled regional operations, Brennan's team, and Sarah. The major was 50, gray-haired, professional. He ran the meeting with efficient precision. Captain Brennan, walk me through the operation. Brennan did, cleanly, professionally, with just enough detail to answer questions without inviting scrutiny. Yes, they had launched with authorization. No, the paperwork hadn't been filed properly due to time constraints. Yes, the intelligence had been solid. No, they hadn't anticipated the level of resistance. The enemy was prepared, the major said. That suggests a leak. Or competent security, Brennan countered. Katim was a professional. He took precautions. 7 armed fighters in prepared positions isn't precaution. It's advance warning. The major looked at Sarah. Captain Morgan, you built the intelligence package. Did anything indicate the target had been compromised? Sarah met his eyes. Nothing in Signal's intelligence or pattern of life suggested he knew we were coming, sir. His movements indicated preparation to relocate, which was why we assessed time as critical. But the defensive posture we encountered was unexpected. Unexpected. The major's tone was dry. That's one word for nearly getting 7 operators killed. With respect, sir, those 7 operators are alive, and Katim is in custody. Sarah kept her voice level. If the intelligence had been wrong, we would have hit an empty compound. Instead, we hit a high-value target with security. That's not compromise. That's successful targeting of a cautious enemy. The major studied her, then nodded slightly. Fair point. He turned to Harris. Colonel, your assessment? Harris's expression was neutral. Captain Morgan's analysis was technically sound. Her recommendation to move quickly was justified by the intelligence. My concern is the breach of protocol in launching without proper authorization procedures. Noted, but I care more about results than procedures. The major stood. Good work, everyone. Brennan, your team did what operators do. Morgan, your intelligence was solid. Harris, tighten up your authorization process so we don't have these gaps. Meeting adjourned. They filed out. Sarah felt the weight lift slightly. Not gone, just shifted. She had survived the immediate crisis, but the war was just beginning. She found Jimmy Reeves at the range that afternoon. He was alone, working through drills with mechanical precision, old habits from decades of muscle memory. Heard you had an interesting night, he said without stopping his practice. News travels fast. Base this size, everything travels fast. Reeves fired 3 shots. Tight group at 50 meters. My son told me you saved his life last night. That someone provided overwatch fire that turned an ambush into a winnable fight. I don't know what you're talking about. Reeves finally turned to look at her. His blue eyes were sharp, knowing. I carried your father's letters for 32 years. I watched him die to save men he loved. Don't insult me by pretending you are not exactly like him. Sarah felt her mask crack. Just slightly. I don't know what I am. Then let me tell you. Reeves set down his rifle. You're a warrior pretending to be an analyst. You're your father's daughter trying to live up to a legend you never knew. And you're in danger because you just painted a target on your back. Harris, among others, Reeves's voice dropped. There are people on this base who don't want Katim interrogated, who don't want the weapons trafficking networks disrupted, who profit from the chaos. You're talking about a conspiracy. I'm talking about reality. War creates opportunities for men who value money over honor. Your success last night threatens those opportunities, which means you've become a problem that needs solving. Sarah felt cold despite the heat. What do I do? You do what your father did. You stand, you fight, and you find allies who will stand with you. Reeves picked up his rifle again. Starting tomorrow, you train with me. Every evening, not just shooting, tactics, survival, the skills you need to stay alive when the system that's supposed to protect you is compromised. Why are you helping me? Because I owed your father a debt I can never repay. Because his daughter deserves better than to die alone fighting an enemy she can't see. Reeves looked at her directly. And because I'm tired of watching good people die while bad people prosper. Sarah nodded. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get worse before it gets better, if it gets better at all. That evening, Sarah began her real education, not the classroom training of intelligence school or the technical certifications of her military career, but the hard practical knowledge of how to survive in hostile territory when the enemy wore your uniform. Reeves taught her combat movement, how to use terrain, how to identify threats before they manifested, how to think like a hunter instead of prey. Mike Reeves joined them, brought other operators. The training became a collective effort, these warriors teaching one of their own skills that might mean the difference between living and dying. You move like an analyst, Mike said bluntly, after watching her attempt a tactical approach. All your power is in your upper body. You need to use your legs, drive from your hips, be explosive instead of careful. They spent 2 hours correcting her movement patterns, breaking bad habits, building new ones. By the end, Sarah was exhausted and humbled and grateful. Better, Brennan said, he had appeared at some point. Watching, assessing, you're learning. Fast learner or not, I'm still way behind. Then catch up, because we're going after Rashid Alad next, and that operation is going to make Katim look like a training exercise. Who's Rashid Alad? Brennan pulled out a tablet, brought up a file. A face appeared, middle-aged, bearded, hard eyes that had seen violence and liked it. Rashid is the supplier. He moves weapons from Yemen through Somalia into East Africa. RPGs, heavy machine guns, explosives. He's armed half the militant groups in the region. And according to Katim's interrogation, he's expecting a shipment in 72 hours. Where? Don't know yet. Katim is being difficult, but our interrogators think he'll break. And when he does, we move. Harris will never authorize it. Harris doesn't know yet. Brennan's smile was thin. By the time he finds out, we'll already be wheels up. You're going to launch unauthorized again. I'm going to do my job, which is capturing high-value targets. If the chain of command wants to play politics while terrorists move weapons, that's their choice, not mine. This is going to end your career, probably. Brennan looked at Sarah. Question is, will you risk yours? Sarah thought about her father, about choices made on rooftops, about standing between chaos and order, about paying prices that seemed unreasonable until measured against alternatives. When do we plan? Tomorrow night. Brennan started to walk away, then stopped. Morgan, one more thing. Harris is asking questions about the rifle you carry, about why an intelligence officer has a custom precision weapon system in her possession. You need a better story than what you've got. What story would you suggest? That it's a personal weapon for recreation, that you're a competitive shooter, that it has nothing to do with military operations. Brennan's voice was serious. And then you need to move it somewhere Harris can't find it if he decides to search your quarters. Where? Our team room. It'll blend with our equipment. And if anyone asks, we'll say it's part of our sniper support package. You'd lie for me like that. I'd lie for any member of my team. And like it or not, you're on the team now. Over the next 2 days, Sarah lived a double life. By day, she was Captain Morgan, intelligence analyst, sitting in the TOC and building target folders and maintaining the appearance of someone who colored inside the lines. By night, she was something else, a warrior in training, learning from operators who treated her like a student in a colleague, in a liability they were determined to make into an asset. Katim broke on the second day. The interrogators had found his weakness. Not pain or fear, but ego. They had convinced him that Rashid viewed him as expendable, that the weapons trafficker was already writing him off as a loss, that his only value was in proving he still mattered. So Katim talked, gave up details, locations, timing, the entire operational picture of Rashid's network. Sarah built the target folder with meticulous care. The weapons shipment would arrive at a coastal airstrip 40 kilometers north of the base. Rashid would be personally supervising. He never trusted subordinates with high-value cargo. That made him vulnerable. The operation would require fast insertion, rapid assault, immediate extraction, the kind of mission special operations forces trained for constantly and executed rarely. Brennan briefed his team, showed them the target area, discussed approach routes and contingencies. His voice was calm, professional, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the awareness that they were about to bet their careers and possibly their lives on intelligence from an unreliable source filtered through an analyst with 3 weeks in country. "What's the confidence level?" Mike Reeves asked. Sarah met his eyes. 80% that Rashid will be there, 90% that weapons are moving, 60% that the timing is accurate. So we might hit empty space, or we might catch the biggest weapons trafficker in East Africa. Brennan looked around the room. Everyone understands the risk. We're launching without authorization. If this goes wrong, we face courts-martial, end of career, possibly prison. But if we wait for Harris to authorize it, Rashid disappears and those weapons end up killing people we're supposed to protect. The team was silent. These were professionals weighing consequences, making calculations about duty and risk and what they were willing to sacrifice for mission success. One by one, they nodded. Mike Reeves spoke for them all. "Let's go hunting." They launched at midnight, 2 helicopters, 7 operators plus Sarah, flying low over terrain that was barely visible in the darkness. The pilots were specialists at this, night flight in hostile territory, using terrain to mask their approach, flying on instinct and instruments and the particular kind of courage it took to fly fast in the dark. Sarah wore body armor and carried her rifle and felt completely out of her element. She was surrounded by operators who had done this hundreds of times, who moved with practiced efficiency, who treated the flight into danger like a routine commute. Brennan sat across from her. His face was painted, his weapon was ready, his eyes were closed, but Sarah knew he wasn't sleeping. He was running the mission in his head, visualizing contingencies, preparing mentally for the violence that might come. 5 minutes out, he said without opening his eyes. Sarah checked her gear. The rifle was secure. Her vest held spare magazines. Everything was in place. Her hands were steady. Her heart was racing, but her mind was clear. The helicopter dropped into the landing zone, a patch of open ground half a kilometer from the target airstrip. Ropes deployed. The team fast roped into darkness. Sarah went last, sliding down with the grace of someone who had practiced this exactly once in training 6 years ago. Her boots hit sand. The helicopter was gone seconds later. Rotor sound fading into the night, and suddenly they were alone in hostile territory. 7 operators and an analyst hunting a weapons trafficker who would kill them without hesitation. Brennan hand signaled. The team moved in a tactical column, using night vision to navigate terrain that was invisible to unenhanced sight, moving with the silent efficiency of wolves hunting prey. Sarah stayed in the center of the formation, protected, the weakest link trying not to slow down professional warriors. Her rifle felt heavy, her breathing was too loud, every sound seemed amplified in the darkness. They reached the observation position, a low rise overlooking the airstrip. Sarah set up her rifle, extended the bipod, looked through her night vision enhanced scope at a scene that took her breath away. The airstrip was active, lights blazed, a cargo plane sat on the tarmac. Men were unloading crates under the supervision of a figure Sarah recognized from intelligence photos. Rashid Alad, in person, directing his operation with the confidence of someone who believed he was untouchable. Brennan was on his radio, speaking in whispers to the quick reaction force waiting 10 kilometers away, confirming target identification, coordinating assault timing. "We have 30 minutes before the cargo is loaded and he leaves," Brennan said quietly. "QRF can't be here in less than 45, which means we go now or we lose him. 7 against maybe 20. Bad odds, But operators didn't think in terms of fair fights. They thought in terms of violence of action and speed and surprise. Brennan looked at Sarah. "You're Overwatch. Anyone threatens to flank us, you put them down. Don't hesitate. Don't second guess. Just shoot. I'm not trained for this. Your father was holding a rooftop alone against a city. You can handle one airstrip." Brennan's voice was hard. "Trust your training. Trust your rifle. Trust yourself." Then he was moving. The team flowed forward like water, silent, purposeful, 7 men against overwhelming odds because that was their job. Sarah watched through her scope, tracking targets, calculating ranges. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. This was what her father had felt. This terrible clarity where everything slowed down and choices became binary, and you either acted or people died. The assault element hit the airstrip like a thunderstorm. Flashbangs detonated. Voices shouted commands in Arabic and English. Gunfire cracked through the night. The cargo plane's engines roared to life. Sarah tracked through her scope, found a fighter moving to flank Brennan's position, put the crosshairs on center mass, hesitated for half a heartbeat. Then she remembered Mike Reeves, remembered the operators who had trained her, remembered her father writing letters to a baby girl he hoped would be brave. She pulled the trigger. The rifle spoke. The target dropped. No time to process, no time to feel. Just move to the next threat. Another fighter moving with an RPG. Down, a machine gunner setting up. Down. She became something mechanical, something that identified threats and eliminated them with mathematical precision. Not thinking, just doing. On the airstrip, Brennan's team was winning, moving with violent efficiency, herding Rashid's men into kill zones, zip-tying prisoners. Brennan himself tackled Rashid as the weapons trafficker tried to board the plane. Then everything went wrong. More vehicles appeared, racing toward the airstrip, mounted weapons firing. The distinctive sound of DSHK heavy machine guns that could tear through body armor like paper. "Ambush!" Mike Reeves shouted. "Secondary force inbound!" These weren't random fighters. These were prepared, coordinated, attacking from 2 directions with overlapping fields of fire. The kind of tactical response that required warning and planning and time. Someone had told them the Americans were coming. Sarah watched the trap close, watched Brennan's team get pinned down, watched the vehicles circle like wolves around wounded prey. She keyed her radio. "This is Overwatch. Secondary forces cutting off your exfil route. QRF is too far out. You're about to be overrun." Brennan's voice came back, strained. "Copy. Suggestions?" Sarah looked at the tactical situation, at the vehicles that were focusing on the pinned operators, at the driver positions that were exposed, at the shot she could make if she was willing to become more than an analyst who happened to know how to shoot. She looked at her father's letters in her pocket, at the legacy she had been carrying without understanding what it meant. Then she spoke 3 words that changed everything. "I have them." Her rifle cracked. The lead vehicle's driver slumped. The vehicle swerved, crashed into the one beside it. Chaos rippled through the enemy formation. Sarah worked the bolt, acquired a new target, fired, again, each shot carefully placed, each one buying seconds Brennan's team could use to reposition. The heavy machine guns turned toward her position. Tracers cut through the darkness. Rounds impacted the ground around her, kicking up dirt and stones. The crack of near misses loud enough to make her flinch. But she kept shooting, kept eliminating threats, kept standing between the enemy and the men she had come to think of as her brothers. The QRF helicopters appeared on the horizon, fast movers coming in hot. Gunships that lit up the remaining enemy vehicles with cannon fire that was as beautiful as it was terrifying. Brennan's team used the opening, pushed forward, secured Rashid and the prisoners, began moving toward the extraction point. Sarah maintained overwatch, scanning for threats, her rifle hot from continuous fire, her hands steady even as her mind screamed that she was exposed and vulnerable and very possibly about to die. The extraction helicopters came in. The team loaded, wounded first, then prisoners, then the assault element. Brennan's voice on the radio. "Overwatch, exfil now." Sarah broke down her position, moved fast toward the landing zone. Behind her, enemy fighters were regrouping, realizing the Americans were escaping, opening fire with everything they had. Rounds snapped past her head, close enough to feel the pressure wake. Sarah ran in a tactical crouch, using terrain, moving like Mike Reeves had taught her, explosive, purposeful. 50 meters from the helicopter, 40, 30. An RPG streaked overhead, detonated 20 meters to her right. The blast wave knocked her sideways. She stumbled, nearly fell, kept moving. 20 meters, 10. Hands reached down from the helicopter, pulled her aboard. The helicopter lifted immediately, banking hard. Tracers following it into the sky but falling short as the pilots pushed the aircraft to maximum performance. Sarah lay on the deck, breathing hard, her ears ringing, her body shaking with adrenaline. A hand gripped her shoulder. Brennan. His face was streaked with dirt and cordite. His eyes were bright with something between respect and awe. You just saved everyone on this bird. Sarah couldn't speak, could only nod. Mike Reeves knelt beside her. Ghost daughter indeed. His voice was rough with emotion. Your father would be so damn proud. The helicopter raced through darkness, carrying operators and prisoners and an intelligence officer who had just crossed a line from which there was no return. When they landed at the base, Colonel Harris was waiting. His face was thunderous. Behind him, military police stood ready. Everyone to the debrief room, Harris ordered. Now. The team filed into the conference room, exhausted, bleeding from minor wounds, carrying the weight of another unauthorized operation and the victory it had produced. Harris stood at the head of the table. His voice was icy, controlled fury. What you did tonight was criminal. You launched without authorization, conducted combat operations outside proper channels, and you, he looked directly at Sarah, provided combat fire support despite being a non-combat rated intelligence officer. Sir, we captured Rashid Alad, Brennan said. We seized a weapons shipment worth millions. We disrupted a network that's been killing people for years. At what cost? Harris slammed his hand on the table. You've broken every rule, violated every protocol. You could have started an international incident. You could have gotten everyone on that bird killed. But we didn't, Sarah heard herself say. Her voice was calm, clear. We succeeded. Again. Harris turned on her. You think success justifies insubordination? You think mission accomplishment excuses contempt for the chain of command? I think protecting American lives is more important than protecting bureaucracy. The room went silent. Everyone staring at Sarah, at the captain who had just openly challenged the colonel. Harris's face went cold. You're relieved of duty, Captain Morgan. Confined to quarters pending investigation. Military police will escort you. Sir, Brennan stood. She saved our lives tonight. Every person in this room is breathing because she provided overwatch. That's exactly the problem. Harris's control finally cracked. She's not qualified for combat operations. She's not trained. She's an intelligence officer who thinks carrying her father's legacy gives her the right to play operator. His words hung in the air, the accusation clear, the challenge explicit. Sarah felt something crystallize inside her, a decision forming from chaos. You're right, she said quietly. I'm not qualified, not trained. I'm just someone who tries to do what's right when the system fails. The system didn't fail. You did. No, Colonel. Sarah's voice was steel now. The system failed when someone warned Rashid we were coming, when someone set up an ambush that should have killed 7 operators, when someone on this base decided weapons trafficking is more valuable than American lives. The room froze, everyone understanding what had just been said, what had just been accused. Harris's face went pale, then red. That's a serious allegation, Captain. It's an observation, based on 3 compromise operations, based on pattern analysis, based on a colonel who stands on buildings at 3 in the morning watching operations he didn't authorize with a satellite phone in his hand. Prove it. Sarah pulled out her tablet, brought up data, signal intercepts, movement patterns, communications analysis. The evidence she had been building for 2 weeks. This is Katim's communications log. He made 3 calls the day before we hit him, all to the same number. A number registered to a phone that pinged off this base's tower. She looked up at Harris. Your tower, your network. Someone warned him. That's circumstantial. This isn't. Sarah brought up satellite imagery. Harris standing on a building. Timestamp showing it was during the Katim raid. Imagery that shouldn't exist but did because Sarah had requested continuous coverage and gotten lucky. That's you, Colonel. Watching an operation you had delayed. Watching Americans fight an ambush you helped create. The room exploded, officers shouting, Harris demanding the imagery be secured, Brennan moving to stand beside Sarah, the moment balancing on a knife edge between validation and destruction. The door opened. The major from higher headquarters entered. He had been summoned by someone, Sarah didn't know who, and now he stood assessing the chaos with the expression of someone who had seen this before. "Everyone sit down," he ordered. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. They sat. The room went silent. The major looked at Harris, then at Sarah. "Colonel, you're relieved pending investigation. Captain Morgan, you're in protective custody until we sort this out. Everyone else, you're confined to base." "Sir," Harris began. The major raised a hand. "I've been watching your operations for 6 months, Colonel. The pattern of compromises, the failures, the fact that every time Captain Brennan's team gets close to disrupting weapons trafficking, something goes wrong." He looked at the imagery on Sarah's tablet. "This just confirms what we suspected." Harris's face went through several expressions, finally settling on defeat. The major continued. "Rashid Alad is in custody. He's already talking, naming names, giving us a network that reaches into our own command structure." He looked around the room. "This base has been compromised at the highest levels, and thanks to Captain Morgan's work and Captain Brennan's unauthorized operations, we finally have the evidence to clean it up." Sarah felt the world shift, the weight lifting, but the major wasn't done. "That said, both of you flagrantly violated military law, launched unauthorized operations, conducted combat activities outside your authority. The fact that you were right doesn't make it legal." "Sir," Brennan said. "However," the major's voice softened slightly, "given the circumstances, given that you were operating against a compromised chain of command, given that lives were saved and enemies captured, I'm recommending letters of reprimand rather than courts-martial. Your careers will take a hit, but you'll survive." "Thank you, sir," Sarah said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. You're both going to spend the next month being debriefed by investigators. Every decision questioned, every action examined." He looked at them seriously. "But you did good work, both of you. Your father would be proud, Captain Morgan." After the room cleared, Sarah sat alone, processing. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind exhaustion and something like peace. Brennan found her an hour later, brought coffee, sat beside her in comfortable silence. "You know this changes everything," he said finally. "I know. Harris will face charges. The network will be exposed. But there will be others. There always are." He looked at her. "You made enemies tonight, Morgan. Important ones. People who value profit over duty. Then I'm in good company." Sarah looked at him. "You've been making those enemies for years." "True," Brennan smiled. "But I'm trained for it. You're an analyst." "Was an analyst. I'm not sure what I am now." "You're an operator who happens to understand intelligence. That's rare, valuable, dangerous." Sarah thought about her father, about choices made in crisis, about legacies that reached across decades, about becoming something you never expected because circumstances demanded it. "I need to write a letter," she said suddenly. "To who?" "My father. I need to tell him what happened, what I did, even though he's been gone 32 years and will never read it." "Then tell me." Brennan's voice was gentle. "I'll listen, and maybe that's enough." So Sarah talked about the fear and the shooting and the moment she had decided to become more than an analyst, about standing on that observation point and pulling the trigger and saving lives, about crossing lines she couldn't uncross. And Brennan listened. This operator who had risked everything on her intelligence, who had stood beside her when she challenged a colonel, who represented everything her father had been and she was trying to become. When she finished, he said simply, "You did good, Morgan. You stood when it mattered. That's all any warrior can do." Is it enough? It's everything. They sat together as the sun rose, two warriors processing what they had done and what it meant and where they went from here. Sarah knew her career had changed forever, that she would face investigations and questions and skepticism from people who valued regulations over results. But she also knew she had saved lives, had disrupted a network, had proven herself to operators who measured worth in actions rather than words. And somewhere in the space between who she had been and who she was becoming, Sarah Morgan felt her father's presence, not as a ghost or a legend, but as a truth. She was Thomas Morgan's daughter. That meant standing between chaos and order. That meant paying prices others wouldn't pay. That meant being brave even when everything inside screamed to run, especially then. Phobie Sentinel, 3 days later. The investigation moved with the grinding, inexorable momentum of military bureaucracy. Teams from higher headquarters swarmed the base like ants on a carcass. They interviewed everyone, examined every communication, built timelines that stretched back months. Colonel Harris sat in a secure room, his gray eyes now holding something that looked like fear. Sarah watched from the sidelines, confined to quarters except for interviews. Her rifle had been seized as evidence. Her computer access revoked. She existed in a strange limbo between vindication and condemnation. The investigation would determine which direction the scales tipped. Brennan was similarly constrained. His team had been stood down, no operations, no training, just waiting while others decided their fates. The operators handled it with the dark humor of men who had faced worse than administrative uncertainty. On the third day, Jimmy Reeves found her at the dining facility. He sat across from her without invitation. His weathered face was serious. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "About what?" "About the fact that Harris isn't the only problem." Reeves kept his voice low. "About the fact that his arrest has stirred up a hornet's nest. About the fact that people who profit from weapons trafficking don't appreciate having their operations disrupted. You're saying I'm in danger. I'm saying you exposed a network that extends beyond this base, beyond this theater, and networks like that don't forgive. They eliminate threats." Reeves leaned forward. "My son tells me there's chatter. Communications intercepts suggesting that someone has put a price on your head. Unofficially, quietly, but it's there." Sarah felt cold. "How much?" "Enough that someone will try." Reeves's blue eyes were intense. "You need to be careful. Watch your back. Trust no one outside the team." "What about you?" "I'm an old man who teaches marksmanship to local guards. Nobody thinks I'm a threat. But you're Thomas Morgan's daughter who just destroyed a profitable operation. You're a target. Then what do I do?" "You survive and you prepare. Because when they come, and they will come, you need to be ready." That evening, against regulations, Sarah met with Brennan and his team in a storage building on the edge of the base. The space was unofficial, not on any roster, the kind of place operators used when they needed to plan outside official channels. "The major briefed me today," Brennan said without preamble. "Harris is cooperating, giving up names. The network is bigger than we thought. Foreign nationals, organized crime, some contractors on this base who were facilitating shipments." "How bad?" "Bad enough that Hire wants us operational again. They're cutting through the bureaucracy, dropping the investigation against us because they need operators they can trust." Brennan looked at Sarah. "They're also reinstating you with a promotion." Sarah blinked. "What?" "Major, you're being promoted to major. The major says your analysis and operational instincts are too valuable to waste sitting in a TOC. He wants you embedded with my team, officially." "I'm not qualified." "You've proved you are." Mike Reeves spoke up. "You've done more in a month than most operators do in a year. The qualification is performance. And you've performed." "This is insane. This is war." Brennan's voice was flat. "Normal rules don't apply. Hire needs results. You deliver results. Therefore, you're operational. Welcome to the team, Major Morgan." The title felt wrong, unearned, but Sarah also felt something else. Pride, belonging, the sense that she was finally becoming what she was meant to be. "What's the mission?" "There's a meeting, 3 days from now. The remnants of Harris's network are gathering to decide how to handle the situation, how to protect themselves, who to eliminate to maintain security." Brennan brought up a tablet. "Intelligence suggests the meeting location is a compound 15 kilometers from here. They'll have security, heavy security. This is everyone with something to lose. Contractors, local warlords, maybe some foreign intelligence. It'll be defended like a fortress." "So we hit it." "We extract intelligence," Brennan corrected. "Documents, hard drives, communications equipment. We need evidence for prosecutions, which means we can't just drop bombs. We need boots on the ground." "When?" 48 hours. The meeting is scheduled for dawn. We insert at night, conduct surveillance. Hit them when they're all in one place." Brennan looked around the room. "This is going to be the most dangerous operation any of us have done. These people know we're coming. They'll be prepared. Some of us might not come back." The room was silent, everyone processing the reality. Then Mike Reeves spoke. "When my father held that rooftop in Mogadishu, he knew he wasn't coming back. But he stood anyway, because that's what Rangers do. We stand." His voice was firm. "I'm in." One by one, the others nodded. Professionals making the calculation, weighing risk against duty, choosing to stand. Sarah felt her father's letters in her pocket, heard his words echoing across 32 years. Be brave, be strong, stand when it matters. I'm in, she said quietly. Brennan nodded. Then we plan, we train, and in 48 hours we end this. The next 2 days blurred into intensive preparation, intelligence gathering, route planning, equipment checks. Sarah worked alongside operators who had accepted her as one of their own, who taught her tactics and trusted her judgment and made her feel like she belonged to something larger than herself. Jimmy Reeves spent hours with her at the range, refining her shooting, building confidence, preparing her for the reality that she would be taking shots that mattered under conditions that were far from ideal. Your father could shoot in any conditions, Reeves said as they worked through low-light drills. Rain, wind, darkness. He understood that precision shooting isn't about the rifle. It's about the shooter's ability to adapt. I'm not him. No, you're you, and that's enough. Reeves adjusted her scope. You've got his hands, his eyes, his heart. The rest is just practice. On the evening before the operation, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, writing letters, one to her mother's grave, telling her what had happened, what she had become, one to her father, words she would never be able to send but needed to write anyway. Dad, tomorrow I'm going into combat with operators who have become my family. We're hunting people who profit from chaos, who value money over lives. The kind of people you spent your career fighting. I'm scared, not of dying, but of failing, of letting down the men who trust me, of proving I'm not worthy of your legacy. But I'm going anyway, because you taught me something without ever saying a word. You taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's standing despite the fear. It's doing what's right even when it costs everything. I hope I make you proud, Dad. I hope when this is over, I can look at your grave and know I stood when it mattered. Your daughter, Sarah. She folded the letter, placed it with her father's final words to her. 2 generations of Morgan warriors, connected by words across time and death. There was a knock on her door. Sarah opened it to find Jimmy Reeves standing there. He looked older in the dim light, more tired, the weight of decades visible in the lines of his face. Couldn't sleep, he said. Me neither. Mind if I come in? Sarah stepped aside. Reeves entered, sat heavily on the edge of her bunk. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stared at his hands. Hands that had held weapons and carried letters and bore the scars of a long, violent life. Finally, he spoke. I need to tell you something. About your father's last moments. About what really happened on that rooftop. Sarah sat beside him, waiting. Thomas knew he was dying. Reeves's voice was rough. After the RPG hit, after the building started collapsing, he was trapped, buried under rubble, but he was still alive, still fighting. I could hear him on the radio, asking about the convoy, making sure everyone got out. You told me he was already gone. I lied. Reeves looked at her. His eyes were wet, because the truth was too hard. The truth was that he suffocated slowly under that rubble, that he spent his last minutes alone in the dark, and that I left him there because he ordered me to. Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. He was alone. He was alone because he chose to be, because that's what love looks like sometimes. Sacrificing yourself so others can live. Reeves gripped her shoulder. Your father's last words weren't profound. They weren't philosophical. He just said, tell Sarah I love her. Tell her to be brave. Sarah couldn't speak, could only nod. Tomorrow, you're going into combat, Reeves continued, against an enemy that knows you're coming, that's prepared to kill you. And I need you to understand something. Your father chose his death. He made it mean something. If tomorrow doesn't go well, he paused, make sure your death means something too. It was a terrible thing to say, and absolutely necessary. Sarah understood that. Understood that Reeves was preparing her for reality, for the possibility that this story didn't have a happy ending. I will, she said quietly. Good. Reeves stood, turned toward the door, then stopped. One more thing. Mike is like a son to me, the only good thing to come from Mogadishu. If something happens tomorrow, if I don't make it, tell him I was proud of him. You're coming with us? You think I'd let you go without Overwatch? Reeves's smile was sad. I'm 54. I've lived longer than I had any right to. Time I finished repaying the debt I owe your father. You don't owe him anything. I owe him everything. And tomorrow I settle accounts. They launched at 0200. 4 helicopters, Brennan's team, a second assault element, combat engineers for breaching, medics for casualties, 20 men total, flying into darkness toward a target that knew they were coming. Sarah rode with Brennan's element, Her rifle was back, cleaned, zeroed, ready. She wore body armor and night vision and carried more ammunition than she thought she could possibly use. Around her, operators prepared with the quiet intensity of men who knew the odds. Jimmy Reeves sat across from her. His rifle was an M14, the same platform he had used 32 years ago in Mogadishu. He caught her looking and smiled slightly. "Old habits," he said. The helicopters dropped them 2 kilometers from the target, far enough to avoid detection, close enough to reach the objective before dawn. They moved through darkness in tactical formation, using night vision to navigate terrain that was hostile and unfamiliar. Reeves moved to a position beside Sarah, spoke quietly. "I'm establishing overwatch on that ridge." He pointed toward high ground overlooking the compound. "You're going in with the assault element. Different roles, same mission. Be safe," Sarah said. "You too, ghost daughter." Then he was gone, moving toward high ground with the practiced stealth of someone who had done this hundreds of times. Sarah watched him disappear into darkness and felt unease she couldn't quite name. The assault element reached their final approach position. Sarah set up with the support element. Her job was to provide precision fire, eliminate sentries, create chaos, enable the breaching team to reach their entry points. Through her scope, she could see the compound, large, well-defended, guards walking patrols with automatic weapons, vehicles positioned at key points, lights illuminating approaches. This wasn't an improvised position. This was a fortress. Brennan's voice crackled on the radio. "All elements check in." One by one, the teams reported ready. "Overwatch," Brennan called. Reeves's voice came back. Strong, calm. "Overwatch set. I have eyes on target. Multiple sentries, ready to engage on your command." "Support element," Brennan said. Sarah keyed her radio. "Support element ready. I have 3 sentries in sight, waiting for green light." Brennan was quiet for a moment, then, "This is it. One way or another, we end this tonight. On my mark. 3, 2, 1, execute." Sarah's rifle spoke. A sentry dropped. Reeves's M14 cracked. Another guard fell. The compound erupted into chaos. The assault element moved. Fast, violent, breaching doors and clearing rooms with practiced efficiency. Flashbangs detonated. Gunfire echoed. Voices shouted in multiple languages. Sarah continued engaging targets. Calm, methodical, each shot carefully placed, each one creating space for operators to advance. Then the enemy's heavy weapons opened up. Machine guns that had been hidden, RPG teams that emerged from concealed positions. The trap within the trap. "Contact! Heavy weapons!" someone shouted. "We're pinned!" Sarah shifted fire, found a machine gun position, engaged. The gun went silent, but another opened up immediately. They had redundant positions, overlapping fields of fire, the kind of defense that suggested professional military planning. "Overwatch," Brennan called. "We need suppression on the north wall." "Copy." Reeves's voice was strained, engaging. Sarah looked toward Reeves's position through her scope, saw muzzle flashes, saw him working his rifle with mechanical precision, saw enemy fire converging on his location. "Hawk, you need to displace," Sarah transmitted. "They've found you." "Negative. Too many targets. If I move, the assault element gets torn apart." Reeves kept shooting. His voice was calm despite the tracers she could see impacting near his position. "I'm good here." But he wasn't good. Sarah could see it developing. Enemy fighters flanking his position, moving with tactical coordination. They knew someone was on that ridge. They were moving to eliminate the threat. "Hawk, you have enemy flanking left. Multiple contacts." "I see them." Still too many targets on the assault element. Reeves's rifle cracked repeatedly. "Tell Mike I love him." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Reeves wasn't planning to survive this. He was holding his position until the assault succeeded or he died, just like her father had done 32 years ago. "No," Sarah said. Her voice was fierce. "You displace right now." "Can't. If I leave, Brennan's team dies. That's unacceptable." Reeves's voice was almost peaceful. "I've been on borrowed time since Mogadishu anyway. Time to pay the bill." Sarah watched it through her scope as the enemy closed on Reeves's position. Saw him shift fire. Drop 2 attackers. 3. But there were more. Always more. She made a decision. The kind of decision warriors make when all the options are terrible but doing nothing is worse. "Support element moving to Overwatch support," she transmitted. "Morgan, negative." Brennan's voice was sharp. Stay in position. Sarah was already moving, running toward Reeves's ridge, her rifle slung across her back, her breathing hard. Every part of her training screamed that this was wrong, that she was abandoning her assigned position, that she was risking the mission. But she was also her father's daughter, and her father had taught her that sometimes the mission mattered less than the man beside you. She reached the base of the ridge, began climbing, and behind her, gunfire intensified. The assault element was pushing into the compound. They were winning, but at Reeves's position, the situation was collapsing. Sarah crested the ridge, found Reeves behind a rock outcrop. He was bleeding from his side, his rifle still working, his face pale but determined. Enemy fighters were 30 meters away, moving through darkness, closing for the kill. "What are you doing here?" Reeves demanded. "Saving an old ranger who's too stubborn to save himself." Sarah brought up her rifle, started engaging the flanking force. Drop, 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 each shot buying seconds. "You should have stayed in position. I learned from my father." Sarah's voice was hard. "He didn't leave his brothers behind. Neither do I." Together they fought, two shooters against a force that outnumbered them 5-1. But they had high ground, they had precision weapons, and they had something the enemy didn't. They had a cause worth dying for. Minutes stretched, each one feeling like an hour. Enemy fire intensified, rounds impacting the rocks around them. RPGs detonating close enough to shower them with debris. "We can't hold this," Reeves said. His voice was weakening, blood loss stealing his strength. "We don't have to hold forever." Sarah could hear the assault element on the radio. They were inside, securing the compound. "Just a few more minutes." "I'm sorry," Reeves said suddenly. His rifle had gone quiet. He was slumped against the rock. "For leaving your father. For 32 years of carrying guilt that should have killed me, but didn't." "You saved 7 Rangers that day." Sarah kept shooting, her magazine running low. "You've trained hundreds of soldiers. You've been a father to Mike and a connection to my dad. You've paid any debt a dozen times over." "Doesn't feel like it." "Because you're a warrior. Warriors always feel like they should have done more." Sarah's rifle clicked empty. She reloaded. Her last magazine. "Should have been faster, braver, better. But Dad didn't die so you could spend 3 decades feeling guilty. He died so you could live. So honor that by actually living." The assault element burst from the compound. Brennan at the lead, moving toward their position with violent speed. The enemy forces broke, scattered. The momentum shifting as professional operators tore through militiamen who had been brave until they faced real opposition. "Exfil! Exfil!" Brennan shouted. "Everyone to the landing zone." Sarah grabbed Reeves, pulled him to his feet. He was heavy, barely conscious. She draped his arm over her shoulder, started moving down the ridge. "Leave me," Reeves mumbled. "Save yourself." "Not happening." Sarah's legs burned. Every step was agony. But she kept moving, one foot in front of the other, carrying the man who had carried her father's letters for 3 decades. Mike Reeves appeared beside her, took his father's other arm. "Dad, stay with us." "Should have listened to your mother," Jimmy Reeves said, voice weak. "Should have quit while I was ahead." "You're not quitting anything." Mike's voice was fierce. "You hear me, old man? You don't get to die." "Not today." They reached the landing zone. Helicopters were inbound. The assault element provided security while the wounded were loaded. Reeves was placed on a stretcher. Medics went to work. IV lines, pressure bandages, the practiced choreography of combat medicine. Sarah collapsed beside the helicopter, exhausted, adrenaline crashing. Her hands were covered in Reeves's blood. Her rifle was empty. Every part of her body ached. Brennan knelt beside her. "You disobeyed orders." "Yes, sir." "You abandoned your position." "Yes, sir." "You saved Reeves's life." Brennan's voice softened. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the craziest. Maybe both." "I'm Thomas Morgan's daughter." Sarah looked at him. Crazy kind of comes with the territory. The helicopters lifted, carrying them back to base, carrying evidence that would dismantle a network, carrying wounded warriors who had stood against chaos and somehow survived. In the medical bay, surgeons worked on Reeves. Sarah waited outside with Mike, neither speaking, both processing what had happened. Hours later, a doctor emerged, tired but smiling slightly. "He's stable, lost a lot of blood, but he'll make it." Mike Reeves closed his eyes, relief washing over him. "Thank you. You can see him in a few minutes. One at a time, Mike looked at Sarah. You go first. He'd want that. Sarah entered the recovery room. Reeves lay on a hospital bed, pale but alive, tubes and monitors attached. His eyes opened when she approached. You're insane, he said weakly. I learned from the best. Your father would have been proud and angry, probably both at the same time. Reeves managed a small smile. You saved my life. You've been saving mine since we met. Sarah pulled up a chair, figured it was time to return the favor. I'm getting too old for this. You're 54. You've got years left. Years to do what? Teach marksmanship to guards who barely listen? Reeves looked at the ceiling. I've been trying to die honorably for 32 years, trying to earn the gift your father gave me. But maybe that's not the point. What is the point? Living, actually living, instead of just surviving. Reeves turned his head to look at her. Your father didn't die so I could spend 3 decades feeling guilty. He died so I could have a life worth living. Took me until now to understand that. So what will you do? Go home. See my grandkids. Maybe finally forgive myself. Reeves reached out, gripped her hand weakly. You don't need me anymore. You've become what you were meant to be, a warrior, like your father, but also yourself. I don't feel like a warrior. None of us do. We just keep showing up, keep standing, keep doing what needs doing. That's all any warrior can do. They sat in silence for a moment. Two people connected by tragedy and choice, by legacy and love. Finally, Reeves said, there's something I need to give you in my quarters. Top drawer of the desk, an envelope. It's for you. What is it? Your father's last letter. The real one. The one he wrote knowing he wasn't coming home. Reeves's eyes were serious. I kept it separate, too painful to include with the others. But you're ready now. 2 days later, after the investigations had concluded and the network had been dismantled and Colonel Harris had been formally charged, Sarah sat alone in her quarters. She held the envelope, her father's handwriting on the front. For Sarah, when she understands. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single page. Her father's words written in the hours before Mogadishu. Sarah, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it home. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I won't get to know you, to watch you grow, to be the father you deserve. But I need you to understand something. The choice I'm about to make, to stand on a rooftop while my brothers escape, isn't about heroism. It's not about medals or legacy. It's about love. I love your mother more than I can express. I love you even though we've barely met. That love is what makes me capable of standing in the fire, of doing the hard thing, of paying the price so others can go home to their families. Someday you'll face similar choices, moments where doing the right thing costs more than you think you can pay. When that happens, remember this. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's love made visible. It's caring about something more than you care about yourself. Be brave, Sarah, not because you're fearless, but because you're afraid and you do it anyway. Be strong, not because you never break, but because you keep standing even after you're broken. Be true, not because it's easy, but because it's right. And know that wherever I am, whatever happens, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of the woman you'll become. I'm proud that you carry my name into the future. I love you more than you'll ever know. Dad. Sarah read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, understanding finally crystallizing. Her father hadn't been a legend. He had been a man, scared and brave and human. He had made choices that cost him everything because he loved people enough to pay that price. Just like she had done on that ridge, abandoning her position to save Reeves, making the choice to value a life over mission protocol, becoming not a perfect soldier but a complete human being. There was a knock on her door. Sarah wiped her eyes, opened it. Major Morgan. It was the major from higher headquarters. May I come in? Sir, Sarah stepped aside. The major entered, looked around the small quarters. You know, your father and I served together, different units, but we crossed paths in training. He was an exceptional soldier. Thank you, sir. The major turned to face her. You're being reassigned. Back to the States. Special Operations Command wants you for a training position, teaching intelligence officers how to operate in the field. Sir, I'd like to stay operational. I know, but you've done enough. You've exposed a network, saved lives, proven yourself in ways most officers never do. The major's voice was gentle. It's time to train the next generation, to pass on what you've learned. Sarah thought about it, about her father, about Reeves, about the legacy she carried and the responsibility that came with it. Yes, sir, I'll go where I'm needed. Good. The major moved toward the door, then stopped. One more thing. Your father's actions in Mogadishu are being reviewed. There's talk of upgrading his Silver Star to the Medal of Honor. It's taken 32 years, but sometimes the right thing happens eventually. After he left, Sarah sat with her father's letter, with the words he had written knowing he would die, with the understanding that legacy wasn't about being perfect, it was about being true. She pulled out paper, began writing her own letter, not to her father this time, but to the next generation, to the soldiers who would come after her and face their own impossible choices. She wrote about courage, about love, about standing in the fire when everything inside screamed to run, about being the person others could count on when the system failed and the mission required more than orders could command. She wrote until her hand cramped, until the words were all said, until she had transformed pain into something that might help someone else someday. 10 months later, Arlington National Cemetery. The ceremony was small. Family, friends, warriors who had served. The crowd gathered around a grave that had stood for 32 years. A stone that had marked one sacrifice was about to mark something larger. The general spoke about Thomas Morgan, about Mogadishu, about a ranger who had held a rooftop alone so his brothers could escape, about heroism that transcended time. Then he unveiled the new inscription. Below the original words, fresh carving, Medal of Honor for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. Sarah stood in her dress uniform. Her rank was major now. Her ribbons told a story of combat and courage. But today wasn't about her. It was about her father, about finally recognizing what he had done. Beside her stood Jimmy Reeves, recovered, healthy, holding hands with his wife and watching his son stand at attention. The debt finally paid, the guilt finally released. The ceremony concluded. People dispersed. Sarah remained, standing before her father's grave, feeling his presence in a way that had nothing to do with ghosts and everything to do with truth. You did it, Dan, she said quietly. You stood when it mattered. You showed me what courage looks like. And now the world knows what we've always known. You were a hero. She felt a hand on her shoulder. Mike Reeves. His face was serious, but peaceful. My father wanted me to give you this. He handed her a small box. Sarah opened it. Inside was a ranger tab, worn, faded, the one Jimmy Reeves had worn in Mogadishu. He said you've earned it more than anyone he knows. Mike's voice was thick with emotion. He said you're not just Thomas Morgan's daughter. You're a warrior in your own right, and warriors recognize warriors. Sarah held the tab, felt its weight, understood what it represented, not just a piece of cloth, but acceptance, recognition, the knowledge that she belonged to something larger than herself. Thank you, she managed. Mike saluted, sharp, clean, the gesture of one warrior to another. Then he walked away. Sarah stood alone with her father's grave, the Medal of Honor citation gleaming in the morning sun, the ranger tab in her hand. She thought about this journey, about a girl who grew up without her father, about an officer who had tried to live up to a legend, about a warrior who had finally understood that legacy wasn't about perfection. It was about standing, about loving something more than yourself, about being brave when everything inside screamed to run. I understand now, Dad, Sarah said. The letters, the legacy, the weight you carried. I understand that being your daughter isn't about living up to a legend. It's about standing in my own fire, making my own choices, becoming not a copy of you, but the best version of me. The wind moved through the cemetery, carrying the scent of fresh flowers and cut grass. Life continuing its forward march. Sarah placed her hand on the stone, felt the cold marble, felt the connection across time and death and understanding. I'm going to teach now, going to train the next generation, going to pass on what you taught me without ever saying a word. That courage is love made visible. That warriors stand not because they're fearless, but because they're afraid and they do it anyway. She straightened, came to attention, rendered a salute that was crisp and perfect and filled with more emotion than any gesture had a right to hold. Rest easy, Dad. You did your part. Now I'll do mine. Then Sarah Morgan walked away from her father's grave, toward her car, toward the future, toward the work of training soldiers who would face their own impossible choices and need to know that they weren't alone, that others had stood in the fire before them. That courage was possible even when it seemed impossible. Behind her, the cemetery stood silent. The stones watched. The dead kept their counsel. And somewhere in the space between memory and hope, between past and future, between what was and what would be, a ranger who had been dead for 32 years smiled. His daughter had stood, had fought, had become not just a copy of him, but something more, something better. She had become herself, and that was the greatest legacy any warrior could leave behind. 5 years later, Special Operations Training Center. Major Morgan, now Lieutenant Colonel Morgan, stood before a classroom of intelligence officers. Young, eager, uncertain about their place in the war-fighting ecosystem. She had been where they were, had felt what they felt. She walked to the front of the room, looked at their faces, saw herself 5 years ago. "Let me tell you a story," she began, "about my father, about choices made on a rooftop in Mogadishu 37 years ago, about a legacy that shaped my life and taught me what it means to be a warrior." She told them about Thomas Morgan, about the letters he wrote, about the sacrifice he made, about standing between chaos and order when everything depended on one person making the right choice. Then she told them about her own journey, about FOB Sentinel, about unauthorized operations and compromised chains of command, about the moment she picked up a rifle and became more than an analyst, about saving Jimmy Reeves on a ridge in the Horn of Africa. "Your job isn't to sit behind a desk," she said. "Your job is to keep warriors alive, to provide intelligence that saves lives. And sometimes, when the system fails and the mission requires it, to step outside your role and do what needs doing." A young captain raised his hand. "Ma'am, isn't that insubordination?" Sarah smiled, the same smile Brennan had given her years ago. "It's leadership. Real leadership isn't about following orders blindly. It's about making difficult choices when the easy answer is wrong. It's about understanding that sometimes protocols matter less than people." She spent the next 2 hours teaching them, not just about intelligence gathering and target analysis, but about courage, about standing, about being the kind of officer who understood that rules served a purpose, but weren't ends in themselves. After class, a young woman approached, nervous, uncertain. "Ma'am, my father was killed in action when I was 3. I never knew him. I've spent my whole career trying to live up to a memory." Sarah looked at her, saw herself, understood the weight of inherited expectations. "Let me tell you what I learned," Sarah said gently. "Your father's legacy isn't about you becoming him. It's about you becoming the best version of yourself. You honor him not by copying his life, but by living yours fully, by standing when it matters, by being brave in your own way." The young woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, ma'am." After she left, Sarah stood alone in the classroom, thinking about her father, about Reeves, about Brennan and Mike, and all the warriors who had shaped her journey. She pulled out the Ranger tab Jimmy Reeves had given her. She kept it in her pocket, a talisman, a reminder of who she was and what she represented. Her phone buzzed, a text from Jimmy Reeves. He was retired now, living in North Carolina, spending time with grandkids, finally living the life Thomas Morgan had died to give him. The text was simple. "Heard you're teaching again. Making your old man proud, making me proud too." Sarah smiled, typed back, "Doing my best. Thank you for everything." The response came immediately. "Thank Thomas. He's the one who started this. I just carried it forward. Now you're doing the same. That's how legacies work." Sarah put her phone away, gathered her materials, prepared for the next class, the next generation of warriors who would need to know that they were part of something larger than themselves, that they stood on the shoulders of giants, that their choices mattered. As she walked through the training center, she passed walls covered with photos. Warriors who had given everything, who had stood when it mattered, who had become legends not because they sought glory, but because they did what was right when it was hard. And there among them was her father, Staff Sergeant Thomas Morgan. Rangers, Mogadishu, Medal of Honor. The photograph showed him young, smiling, full of life and hope, and the particular kind of courage it took to wear a uniform knowing it might cost everything. Below his photo, a quote, words Sarah had written for his memorial. "He taught us that courage is love made visible, that warriors stand not because they're fearless, but because they're afraid and they do it anyway. That legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about giving others the strength to stand when their time comes." Sarah touched the photo gently, felt the connection across time and death and love. "I'm standing, Dad," she whispered. Just like you taught me. Just like you showed me. I'm standing. Then she walked away. Toward the next class. Toward the next generation. Toward the future her father had died to make possible. Behind her, the photo remained. A warrior frozen in time. Forever young, forever brave. Forever standing. And somewhere in the space between memory and hope, between past and future, between what was and what would be, Thomas Morgan watched his daughter continue the work he had started. She was standing. She was teaching. She was carrying the legacy forward, not through copying him, but through becoming fully herself. And that was everything he had ever hoped for. Everything he had ever fought for. Everything he had ever died for. The Reaper's legacy lived on, not in medals or stones or ceremony, but in the hearts of warriors who stood when it mattered, who loved something more than themselves, who understood that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was standing anyway, always standing, forever standing, until the mission was complete and the war was won and the warriors could finally rest. But until then they stood, just like Thomas Morgan had shown them, just like Sarah Morgan was teaching them, just like the next generation would carry forward. Standing, always standing. The Reaper's legacy. The end.